has begun.
We are looking at people who want to live in our country.
Everything that happens here is going to affect every other place in the world.
When stakes are so high, we will keep fighting.
You were born for this moment.
I'm ready to win.
CBS Morning.
Your morning routine just got better.
I love that.
CBS Mornings.
We cannot secure our border. We need to close the border. If we have a president that doesn't want to secure the border, let's close the border.
The path to socialism runs through a divided Republican Party. It is time to unite, to get behind President Trump.
Former President Donald Trump was back in a New York City courtroom today. He testified in the defamation damages trial brought by writer Eugene Carroll.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We're following two major stories. Former President Donald Trump took the witness stand today in his civil defamation trial brought by Eugene Carroll. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, we begin on Capitol Hill. Divisions among Senate Republicans are threatening to derail the ongoing border policy negotiations with the Biden White House. It caps off a week in which former President Trump racked up more congressional endorsements after his New Hampshire primary win. The former president has railed against the negotiations on social media. Margaret Brennan and Scott MacFarlane join us now. Margaret is CBS News' chief foreign affairs correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Scott, quickly, where exactly do the negotiations stand?
With leaders in the Senate and the negotiators themselves telling us the talks are still alive. Based on our reporting late this afternoon, Bob, it's quite clear these negotiations, these high-stakes negotiations tying border security in Ukraine, are wobbly, and that Donald Trump is positioned, if he chooses to cut the legs out from beneath these wobbly talks. We spoke with Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, a Donald Trump ally. We asked him where things are headed. He's still bullish on the prospects of getting this done. Take a listen to what else he had to add.
Donald Trump have the ability to kill this immigration deal?
Well, I think there's not a deal to be killed yet. To those who don't like it, show me how you changed the law. What is your model to get 60 votes to make the changes to the law that President Trump identified as being needed on his watch? When he was president, he talked about asylum changes being necessary to have a logical, rational immigration system. I agree with him.
But, Bob, the clock is ticking so loud you can hear it resonate off the marble walls. The closer we get to congressional primaries and Election Day, the harder any big deal becomes. And Senate Republicans who are closely aligned with President Trump and former President Trump say this is just a non-starter for them, even when they do see this thing on paper.
Scott, stick with us. I want to come back to you in a moment. Margaret, you've been working the phones. Senator Graham, he's been close to the immigration issue for a long time. He says one thing, but what about Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell? What have you been hearing about his position on all of this and where it stands?
Well, when these headlines began breaking late yesterday, I began working the phones and talking to my sources who said, no, McConnell's message was never the talks are off. It was acknowledging the political reality of how much more difficult this will be in an election year when the presumed nominee Donald Trump wants to run on the issue of the border, but is incredibly unspecific in all of his messaging other than saying something needs to be done and saying that Joe Biden has failed. One of the things I thought was interesting from what Lindsey Graham said in that Scott interview, the most important thing, I would argue, since he is the one who will have to arguably deliver Donald Trump since he is one of the 6 negotiators, Lindsey Graham said, I will say to Trump, if we can put this package together, you will have more tools to secure America when you are president. That's a sales pitch to Donald Trump. I'll make you a stronger president by giving new authorities to the current one, who he is arguing is on his way out. But one of the things that Donald Trump ran on in the last election, the one before that, and the current one is just the idea of the border. He did not actually change immigration law. What they're talking about now is not comprehensive immigration reform. This is not anything near the talks we had decades ago. These are significant changes, the most significant potentially in decades. But we're talking about restrictions on asylum, making it harder to classify yourself as having credible fear, a more intense interview process, essentially, speeding up the interview process with judges for your day in court for that to happen faster, and restricting parole. And it is parole that remains the sticking point in these talks. Senator Murphy, the Democratic negotiator, said that we'll know in the next 24 to 48 if you can close this. But from what I'm told, that the text is what they are working on here, that there already is actually like a broad agreement on the deal. The question is whether you can sell it to the conference, and then, of course, can you bring it to the floor in the House? When I went to Eagle Pass, Texas, with the Speaker, Mike Johnson, he told me he does want a deal. There's a moral imperative to get it done. The question is, can he get on board with what these compromise issues are?
Scott, could you answer Margaret's question based on your own reporting? What's the state of play right now among House Republicans as they look at this emerging deal?
Oh, this is such a startling contrast. You've got Trump's allies, including Lindsey Graham in the Senate, some of whom are trying to keep hope alive for this deal. Lindsey Graham saying, among other things, that he doesn't think this would impact the 2024 election or have an adverse effect on Donald Trump. House Republicans, oh boy, they're saying something much different. They want the border as a vibrant campaign issue. Republicans worry they're about to lose the House. Republicans can taste getting the U.S. Senate control back, and the border issue they think is vibrant. But there have also been House Republicans who have said outwardly they don't want to give President Biden a victory. Troy Nehls of Texas, one of the most devoted Trump supporters in the U.S. House, said it in so many words. So what you have here is a long shot, potentially, getting something to navigate its way through the U.S. Senate in what would take weeks, not days, and then head to the U.S. House, where it's the ultimate 7-10 split. You've got a House Republican majority that may not want to put this on the floor, so they'd have to pass it, through going around, circumventing the House rules on immigration reform, on border security. That just seems far-fetched.
What's intriguing about this, Margaret, is we're not just having and covering a debate on immigration and border policy. There are other issues, especially on foreign policy and national security, that are intermingled with this whole conversation. On Ukraine funding, on Israel. How are those issues and those discussions affecting what's happening on the border?
And that's the pushback against those critics in the Senate like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, who are saying it's not time for a border deal, which is when the president of the United States, as he said, as he did last week, that no, the U.S. border is not secure and it hasn't been in decades. And Republicans are running on the fact that the border is not secure and it's a national security crisis. How do you then not do anything, including not provide funding to the border security agents who are there and saying, I need more men, I need more money? So that is a hard explanation to make to voters for both sides, I think, on that. In terms of unlocking the rest of the national security supplemental, it was Joe Biden who came out as president of the United States in Oval Office address and said, we have 4 huge national security crises, border being one of them. I'm asking Congress to act. It was Mike Johnson, the speaker, who said border and Ukraine have to be together, tied. But now it's all congested behind this one issue. And it just does not seem politically feasible from the sources I talked to uncouple them at this point. But I will say, there are some House Republicans who are very clearly saying they don't want movement on the border. But then you look at the Texas delegation, and there are plenty on it who do. You talk to Tony Gonzalez, you talk to Mike McCall. Those Texas Republicans are serious. They were in Mexico just days ago trying to get the Mexican government to do more because it's a backyard issue for them. So if you are in a border state, how do you go home and say that you didn't try to do something? So it's not quite clear that this is a Republican versus Democrat issue. It's actually much more complicated. And that's what I continue to hear from some of my sources saying, sure, there are people out there making a lot of noise, but let me tell you, I could get votes potentially to get this deal done. Or does this compromise deal that they come to in the Senate, if it doesn't move forward, do you come up with some new version, dress it up and call it a House version of that same bill? There are people who are not yet giving up on trying to get this done. But it is, as you know, Bob, in our CBS polling, the #2 issue for voters right after the economy. And you don't just see it as a Republican issue. This is a Democratic issue, too. People are concerned. And so the president is going to have to be talking about this as well. And it's complicated for him because he can't come out and fully give this a bear hug, right? Because if he does, then it draws the ire of Donald Trump. Joe Biden can't say this is my deal. And that's a difficult political sale as well.
So who closes this, Scott? I mean, there's so many players.
That's a great point.
You
Yeah,
and Margaret have outlined so many players. I thought the Texas delegation point's a great one. But, Scott, who actually can come in if it's not the president, as Margaret said, who, for various reasons, politically and legislatively, may not want to weigh in that way? Who can close the deal, if anyone?
Let me tell you who could champion the deal, if not close it. How about the Biden district Republicans in the U.S. House, who are near major cities which have dealt with the bust-in migrant problem, and who want to have some resume, Bob, something to show in November for what they did over the past 2 years. And the critics of the House Republicans have said, what have you accomplished? What's your legacy? Among the critics, one of their own, Chip Roy of Texas. So those House moderates, they call themselves pragmatists, might be muscle to try to push their conference towards at least taking up this bill. But also, there are champions of Ukraine funding out there. I talked to one of them today, Tim Kaine of Virginia, who says if you separate these pieces, if you did, the votes are there for Ukraine if it gets on the floor. But for now, this is a sandwich that has been jammed together, immigration and Ukraine. And I got to tell you, Margaret and Bob, I still don't see how two very difficult things put together makes that single thing any easier. We're about to find out.
There's one of those D.C. sayings, right? If you have a big problem, what do you do to solve it? You make it even bigger, which only makes sense in Washington. And I feel like this is one of them. But I will just, Bob, on this point for Ukraine, one of the things that's being talked about in the Senate right now, and it has support in the House as well from people like French Hill of Arkansas. In the Senate, you'll see Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Jim Risch in Senate Foreign Relations trying to get the authority in law to be able to seize $300 billion worth of Russian sovereign assets. That's Russian money, and it counts around the world, a lot of it in Europe. And to be able to put into the law that it's not just U.S. taxpayers helping Ukraine, but we're using the Russian money to fight the Russians, and giving Ukraine the authority to do that is significant. And that's one of the sweeteners that Democrats are eyeing. It says maybe we can get more Republicans on board if we make the point Russian money is going to fund this fight as well. So watch that space.
This is old school Washington deal making going on. Everyone's trying to get their part of their agenda as part of this agreement. A lot to talk about, I'm sure, on Face the Nation on Sunday. Margaret Brennan and Scott McFarland, we really appreciate your reporting. And you can watch, Margaret, of course, on Face the Nation this Sunday on your CBS station and right here on CBS News Streaming. Meanwhile, the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee says it's time to unite around former President Donald Trump. We'll have that conversation and more after the break. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response? You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
How can we become our best selves? That may be more about character than talent.
The ultimate mark of your potential is how far you've climbed, not how high you've gone.
Realizing your true potential with Adam Grant as we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. We might still be in primary season, but some Republican lawmakers are already lining up behind former President Donald Trump. My CBS colleague Major Garrett discussed that dynamic and other issues with the National Republican Senatorial Committee Chairman, Senator Steve Daines of Montana.
Is the Republican nomination fight over?
Yes.
Should Nikki Haley drop out?
Yes.
Why?
Donald Trump will be the nominee for the Republican Party, and Donald Trump will be the next president elected in November of 24 and be sworn to office in January of 25. Look, it's important, as Tim Scott said when he was running for president, he said, the path to socialism runs through a divided Republican Party. It is time to unite, to get behind President Trump. You know, the folks who are cheering right now for this primary fight to continue are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden.
So if Nikki Haley continues her campaign, she is, if I hear you correctly, Mr. Chairman, aiding and abetting socialism.
Well, there's just not a path for Nikki Haley to win the nomination. It's time to come around President Trump, line up behind him, and focus on the general election. This is going to be a tight race in the general election, November of 24. We've got tight races for the president. There'll be tight races for the Senate. There'll be tight races for the U.S. House. And the stakes could not be higher. The contrast cannot be more clear between the philosophies, positions the Republicans are taking and President Trump will be taking and what Joe Biden has done to this country. The voters will have a very clear choice in November of 24.
Speaker Mike Johnson said Monday that it's long past time for Republicans in Congress to endorse President Trump. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I think it's time for all Republicans to get behind President Trump and focus on November. I mean, we are just 8 months away.
That includes Mitch McConnell and John Thune.
Absolutely. Yeah, we should all unite and get behind President Trump. He will be the nominee. He will be the nominee. He will win in November of 24 and be sworn in office in January 25.
Last night on Truth Social, the former president said, anyone who donates to Nikki Haley will be out of the MAGA camp forever. Will the NRSC take a similar approach?
Look, last time I checked...
Take no donations from anyone who's helping Nikki Haley?
No, well, look, as I approach the Senate race, which I'm solely focused on, it's important to remember that winning elections is about addition, not subtraction. It's about multiplication, not division. So we need
So you'll take money from people who continue to fund Nikki Haley?
We want to make sure we unite and come together. That is the way you win elections. And that is why it's important that the sooner that we all unify and get behind President Trump and move forward towards a general election, the better off we'll be.
Right, but if someone who is giving Nikki Haley a check gives the NRSC a check, you'll take it?
Look, we'll deploy those dollars to make sure
Got it.
We're electing Republicans in the United States Senate.
So Gary Peters, your colleague on the Democratic side, told our Nicole Kellyanne last week, quote, "We're going to win. We have superior candidates. We continue to win on issues like reproductive freedom. So we're going to bring back all our incumbents and hold the states we currently have, including Michigan." Your reaction?
To start with, what about West Virginia? He says he's going to hold all of our incumbents. Now, I realize Joe Manchin has
He's not counting that as an incumbent anymore.
Well, it's an incumbent state. And I'll tell you what, we've really worked
Okay, we'll
hard.
agree that's over.
We've worked hard at the NRSC under my leadership to find candidates that can win not just primaries but general elections. That's what's key to, of course, winning in November is candidates that have a broader appeal. West Virginia is proof point one, where we recruited Governor Jim Justice into that race. President Trump endorsed Governor Justice in mid-October, and by mid-November, Manchin announced his retirement. It's peace through strength. We're seeing this continued really momentum growing here across these key battleground states. Remember, in states like Montana and Ohio, every single statewide elected official is a Republican, except for John Tester in Montana and Sherrod Brown in Ohio. President Trump will carry both those states overwhelmingly. And so Gary Peters is a friend of mine. I respect Gary. I think he's dead wrong on that assessment.
Talk to me about Kari Lake in Arizona. When we spoke in July, you said you'd had good and robust conversations with her about focusing on the future. Yesterday, the chair of the state party in Arizona resigned because of a story based on recordings that Kari Lake made of their conversations 10 months ago. She alleges the state party chair is unethical. Is Kari Lake a problem for you in Arizona?
Look, Kari Lake is an outstanding candidate. In fact, I think she is one of the most talented candidates we have across the battlefield in the Senate races in this country. She's very articulate, she's very passionate, and look, the latest polls, in fact a PPP poll that's a Democrat poll that came out of Arizona the last 2 weeks, show Kari Lake beating Gallego head-to-head. So Kari not only is a strong candidate, Kari Lake is going to be the next senator from the state of Arizona.
Is she on the ethical high ground here in this dispute with the party chair?
Look, I mean, Kari Lake, and the first I knew about this was I saw the social media report yesterday. I haven't, in fact, even listened to the recording, but I saw it out there in the social media buzz. Look, she is a solid, strong candidate. She pushed back, according to the reports I've read, she pushed back on any attempts here to try to bribe her out of the race. She pushed back against that. To me, that's a high standard of integrity. She's doing the right thing, and we're glad to see Kari Lake in that race, and I think Kari Lake is going to be the next senator from Arizona.
When do you expect Matt Rosendale to announce his candidacy for the Senate?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know it's coming.
I've known Matt a long time.
I know you have, but you know it's coming.
And he's a good friend. Yeah, he may indeed announce. He's been talking about an announcement for several months. He's been talking about this since last summer. But I think at some point he probably will get in that race. I hope he stays in his House seat and continues to build seniority for the great state of Montana. But it seems like he may be getting in that race, and we'll see what happens.
On another front, former Trump White House aide Peter Navarro has now been sentenced to 4 months in prison on 2 charges of contempt of Congress. Navarro was convicted for ignoring a subpoena to cooperate with the House committee investigating the January 6 attack on the Capitol. Navarro was also ordered to pay a fine of $9,500. Prosecutors had sought a sentence of 6 months and a $600,000 fine. The 74-year-old who worked in the Trump White House on trade issues has already filed an appeal. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump, he did take the witness stand today in the E. Jean Carroll defamation damages trial. Next, we look at the former president's testimony. You're streaming America Decides.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's a country music legend, philanthropist, fashion icon, and now rock star.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable with who you are.
Find out what's next for Dolly Parton when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happierness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows.
We need to step up and help them.
And a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump did take the witness stand in the defamation's damages trial brought by writer E.G. Carroll today. His testimony, though, only lasted for 4 minutes. Trump has already been found liable in a previous sexual abuse and defamation trial. Carroll is seeking at least $10 million in damages. CBS News campaign reporter Katrina Kaufman joins us now. She is also an attorney. Katrina, thank you. It was a brief time on the witness stand today. What did the former president have to say under oath?
Hi, Bob. As you said, his testimony was very brief. It was highly restricted. Before he even got up there, the judge and Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, had a long debate about what could be said on the stand, and it really wasn't much that was allowed. In the end, he said that he 100% yes agreed with a deposition that had been shown earlier in the day, in which he had said that E. Carroll had lied about her allegations, and he said that she wasn't his type. He also said that he had never instructed anyone to hurt Carroll and that he was just defending himself against the accusations. So it was a very, very short testimony from him today.
Why do you believe he took the stand?
I think he wanted to get up there and defend himself. I think that he seemed a little agitated at how restricted he was. He was kind of pursing his lips and shaking his head. And even when the judge and Alina Habba were debating before the jury was in the room, I remember at one point, Roberta Kaplan, who is E. Carroll's attorney, said she could hear him muttering behind her that he was going to get up there and say that he didn't know who that woman was. He'd never seen her before in his life. And at another point, he audibly actually started just waving his hands around. And I think he said, "Oh, I've never met this woman. I don't know who that woman is," to the judge.
So what's next in this trial?
So tomorrow morning, we're going to meet again at 9:30. There will be closing arguments. Then the judge will give the jury instructions, and then the jury will deliberate. So it's plausible we could maybe even have a decision by the end of the day.
In the legal community, among your sources, what's the expectation of what that decision ultimately could be? She's seeking $10 million, but is that something that's realistic based on the way these kind of cases usually play out?
That's a great question. I think it's really hard to say what the damages are going to be in this. Just alone, when they had Ashley Humphreys, who is an expert on reputational repair, testify the other day, she was saying that just to repair E. Carroll's reputation could cost between $7 and $12 million. And that's not even considering punitive damages or any other compensatory damages to Carroll. So I think a lot of it will just depend on how all of this information has been received by the jury.
For former President Trump, this comes as he's running for president of the United States, trying to seek that Republican nomination. Do you sense that there's a political group of advisors that's following him into court? Is he still going down to 40 Wall Street or elsewhere to make statements to rally his base? What's the scene like politically as well as legally?
It was interesting today. There were quite a few people in the courtroom. At one point, Stephen Chung, who works on his campaign, was actually kicked out because his cell phone went off. There was also an attorney who's involved in his hush money case who was conferring with him. And, oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Bob. I feel like I'm not sure what's going on.
No worries. Katrina Kaufman, I know what it's like to be on a busy street in New York. Don't worry about it. We'll let you get back to work, or hopefully maybe you can head home.
I had some feedback there. I apologize.
No worries. I've been on those street
nice
conversations. Thank you, Katrina Kaufman, reporting for CBS News. We really appreciate it. And that does it for us today. I'm sure I'll be back in a New York street corner soon, reporting for CBS. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind